So in my last video, I went over the Mountain Thane hero spec for Fury and Prot Warriors, and in this video, I wanted to go over the Sand Lane hero spec for Unholy and Blood DKs. And I think Mountain Thane was a really interesting hero spec, so we'll see if Sand Lane can live up to that. So the first node is Vampiric Strike. Your Death Coil and Death Strike have a 10% chance to make your next Heart Strike or Scourge Strike become Vampiric Strike. Vampiric Strike heals you for 3% of your max health and grants you Essence of the Blood Queen, increasing your haste by 1.5% up to 7.5% for 20 seconds. So first off, this heal isn't really going to be that substantial for Blood DK. I mean, you Death Strike and you get your full health bar back, but that amount of healing can be pretty substantial for Unholy. But this stacking haste is going to be pretty good for both of these specs. You get 1.5% haste up to 7.5 for 20%. Now, it does sound like when looking at the developer interview that some developers did over these hero talents, it sounds like this haste isn't going to be infinitely stackable. So it sounds like there is going to be some duration cap, but you'll be able to have quite a lot of additional haste quite a lot of the time, especially when combining with the capstone, which is Gift of the Sand Lane. While Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation is active, you gain Gift of the Sand Lane. Gift of the Sand Lane increases the effectiveness of your Essence of the Blood Queen by 100% and replaces your Heart Strike and Scourge Strike with Vampiric Strike for the duration. So both of your kind of big cooldowns for both of these specs now just give you Vampiric Strikes for the duration for those abilities and massively increase the effectiveness. So you'll get 6% of your health every time you use it, and you'll be getting a lot of additional haste that you'll have stacked up to the max the whole time these cooldowns are up. And again, the healing will be good for Unholy, but that haste will be incredible for both specs. But then we have the left side of the tree starting with a choice node, starting with Newly Turned. Raise Ally revives players at full health and grants you an absorption shield equal to 20% of your max health. Now this is actually really good, especially for any classes that have B-reses that have to spend a resource to do it. Like Paladins have to spend their holy power and DKs have to spend their runic power. So getting a big absorb shield, especially for Blood DK, is really good because that runic power could potentially have been giving you a Death Strike that could heal your whole health bar. Then we have Vampiric Speed. Death's Advance and Wraith Walk's movement speed increases are increased by 10%. That's actually really nice for Death's Advance. Activating Death's Advance or Wraith Walk increases 4 allies' movement speed by 20% for 5 seconds. Now, this is actually a lot less substantial than I think a lot of people would initially think. 20% movement speed is decent, but it's not crazy, and it's only for your group, but this can be pretty substantial for Mythic Plus. And when specifically talking about it in that element, Blood DKs specifically usually wouldn't have an issue surviving. Blood DKs are one of the more survivable specs unless it's at the start of a pool, so usually reviving somebody with a runic power isn't going to end up killing you, so the speed may just be better for at least Mythic Plus running. And then the next node is Infliction of Sorrow. When Vampiric Strike damages an enemies affected by Blood Plague or Virulent Plague, it consumes a disease, dealing 200% of the remaining damage. While Gift of the Sand Lane is active, Vampiric Strike no longer consumes your diseases and instead extends the duration of your diseases by 3 seconds and deals 20% of the remaining damage to the enemy. And as we went over, Gift of the Sand Lane is when you're in Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation. Now, this can be pretty bad for Unholy DKs because consuming your plague can be an issue. It can feel pretty clunky. For Blood DK, you can apply Blood Plague so frequently just with Blood Boil that it's probably not going to matter, just going to be a damage increase and you won't really notice it. But this is also just going to be a pretty big damage increase when you're in your Vampiric Blood or Dark Transformation, especially for Unholy, where it's not going to be eating your disease. Then the final node on the left side is Visceral Regeneration. Your Heart Strike and Scourge Strike have a 3% chance per stack of Essence of the Blood Queen to refund a rune. Vampiric Strike doubles the chance to refund a rune. So depending on your stacks of haste that go from 1.5 to 7.5, you just have chances to refund runes. Vampiric Strike obviously has double the chance. It is a low chance, but these are abilities that you generally spam very frequently, and it's obviously going to be increasing depending on how many stacks of this you actually have on you. So this will actually be refunding runes quite frequently. And I think this is something that actually makes a spec feel better to play. Having more resources, especially if you're a spec that is not resource capped all the time, it generally feels pretty good to get just more resources randomly. Then we have the middle row starting with Blood-Soaked Ground. While you are within your Death and Decay, your physical damage taken is reduced by 5% and your chance to gain Vampiric Strike is increased by 5%. Now, like we went over with the Mountain Thane tree, we don't know if this increase is 5% of the chance that was already stated or if this is just another 5% increase, haste, and these numbers can change very quickly. This is probably the one area of this tree that I don't like. Standing in Death and Decay, standing in Consecrate as a pally to get additional buffs is never fun. Now this issue with DKs is much less prevalent because you can just target your Death and Decay anywhere, you have resets to get more Death and Decays, so it's much less of an issue than say something like a prop pally standing in Consecrate, but it's still something I don't like. I wish they would just remove this. Standing in your Death and Decay is just not fun. And then going to the next node, we have Frenzied Bloodthirst. Essence of the Blood Queen stacks 2 additional times and increases the damage of your Death Coil and Death Strike by 5%. So this is pretty substantial, gives you massively increased haste. It also buffs up the chance to refund runes from one of the other nodes we went over, and then you're just getting a small damage increase. So this is overall pretty substantial, especially for that increased haste. The increased haste, you are gonna feel quite a bit. And then finally, we have Inside Terror. Heart Strike and Scourge Strike extend the duration of Essence of the Blood Queen by 0.5 seconds. Vampiric Strike increases the extension by 100%. So this is just allowing you to stack up and continue keeping those haste stacks more and more. But as the developers went over, there's still probably going to be a cap where you can't just keep extending that duration. But overall, going to be pretty good. Massively increased haste that you'll just be able to keep on you for a longer period of time. And then we have the right side tree, starting with another choice node, first being Vampiric Aura. Your leech is increased by 3%, and that's just full stop. While Lichborn is active, the leech amount is increased by 100% and affects 4 nearby allies. Now this one's quite confusing on how much it's actually going to give, because your leech is increased by 3%, is just full stop, you get 3% more leech, but the second part is while Lichborn is active, the leech amount is increased by 100% and affects 4 nearby allies. Now this could be, it's taking that leech you get from this, the 3% leech, it's doubling that and giving it to your allies, which is 6% leech, which is still actually very good. 6% leech, you and 4 other allies is actually very good. But this also does kind of sound like it's just giving you the leech from Lichborn, which I think is 10%, and then doubling it. So that could be an excessively high amount of leech for you and 4 allies for your whole group, which would be good in almost any situation. But I do think it's probably talking about the leech increase that just comes on this. But again, 6% leech for your whole group is really good. And then we have Bloody Fortitude. Icebound Fortitude reduces all damage you take by up to an additional 30% based on your missing life. So the lower life you are, the more Icebound Fortitude reduces the damage you're taking. Killing enemies that grants experience or honor reduces the cooldown of Icebound Fortitude by 3 seconds. Now Bloody Fortitude gonna be very good in Mythic Plus, especially for tanks, but Vampiric Aura also gonna be good in Mythic Plus or even Raid. So I think both of these are very, very good, and I think both of them are actually gonna be very good in different circumstances as well. Because Bloody Fortitude you may need for like certain raid fights. You may just get hit crazy hard from a boss, and Bloody Fortitude may allow you to survive. Then the next node is the Blood is Life. Vampiric Strike has a chance to summon a Blood Beast to attack your enemy for 10 seconds. Each time the Blood Beast attacks, it stores a portion of the damage dealt, and when the Blood Beast dies, it explodes, dealing 50% of the damage accumulated to nearby enemies, healing the Death Knight for the same amount. So there's quite a lot going on with this. So your Vampiric Strike just has some unknown chance to summon a Blood Beast that'll just hit things for 10 seconds. So you're summoning this random thing, it hits things, does some damage. Now each time the Blood Beast attacks, it stores some of that damage it's dealing, and then when it expires, it explodes, dealing 50% of all that stored damage as damage to all enemies and healing to you. So a pretty interesting effect that I think is also going to be getting buffed here. But then we have another choice node, Sanguine Scent. Your Death Coil and Death Strike have a 15% chance to trigger a Vampiric Strike when damaging enemies below 35% health, and it is guaranteed to critical strike. So this is a soft execute that in certain fights can be pretty crazy. I think in most raiding fights this will actually be really good. Then we have Pact of the Sand Lane. You store 50% of all shadow damage dealt into your Blood Beast to explode for additional damage when it expires. Now this second one seems to be basically only for Unholy DK, because Unholy is a DPS spec going to be doing a lot more damage, but it's also going to be doing a lot more shadow damage. But this can also be pretty crazy for Unholy, because you could get a Blood Beast proc, then just pop a bunch of cooldowns, get crazy amounts of shadow damage, then this Blood Beast explodes for massive amount of damage, just giving you some potentially pretty big burst. But that's all the nodes for Sand Lane. Now I do think this is a very good hero spec as well. I think a lot of the elements of this are pretty interesting. Obviously a lot of the numbers can change pretty heavily. A lot of the numbers in this right now actually seem pretty crazy, especially with like that leech aura and potentially how much Unholy DK is DKs could build up for their blood beast, but I think the actual ideas in these hero talents are really interesting, and I think really does play into being a blood or unholy DK. I think they did really well with putting stuff in here that fits both blood and unholy DKs and allows both of them to use it. So I would definitely put it up there in the same region as Mountain Thane. Pretty good talents overall. There's a lot of really interesting ideas, and I think is going to be really thematic for playing unholy or blood DKs. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.